correctly pronounce French sounds, how to articulate well, how to effectively avoid common pronunciation errors. Then we will transition to the foundational basics of grammar, understanding gender, mastering articles, using adjectives, and grasping pronouns. Everything you absolutely need to speak clearly and accurately. In the second part, we will jointly delve into the essential verb tenses: the present, the passé composé, that's past perfect, the imparfait, that's imperfect past, the future proche, that near future, and the future simple, that's simple future, all accompanied by an abundance of highly practical examples. Following that, we will explore fundamental phrases for everyday life, such as introducing yourself, ordering in a restaurant, booking a hotel, and even going to the doctor. In short, every practical expression you need to navigate real-life situations in French. We will then analyze authentic French expressions, those colorful and vivid phrases that native speakers use every single day, to help you understand better and speak more naturally, completely free from the fear of making mistakes. And finally, we will conclude by addressing 25 common errors that learners frequently make, providing concrete solutions and actionable strategies to easily avoid them. Laura, how does this comprehensive program sound to you? Is it truly a good fit? Honestly, Thomas, I'm beyond excited, she exclaimed. I feel like I've finally found a truly comprehensive course that will answer all my questions. Pronunciation is something that sometimes intimidates me, so I cannot wait to tackle that initial section. And I know I make a lot of common mistakes without even realizing it, so that part will be incredibly helpful. I'm absolutely certain this video will significantly transform my French level. That is precisely the goal, Laura, I affirmed. This video is not meant for a quick, one-time watch. It is a genuine, actionable tool that you can revisit and reuse countless times. Do not hesitate to take breaks, jot down notes, repeat after us aloud, and most importantly, save this invaluable content somewhere accessible so you can refer back to it whenever you wish. I promise you one thing: if you diligently follow this course, by the end of these 2 hours we spend together, your French level will indeed have genuinely changed. You will become more fluent, more confident, and significantly more comfortable speaking and writing. Laura, do you have any final advice before we officially begin? Yes, she responded. I just want to say one very important thing. Do not be afraid to make mistakes. I too was hesitant to speak for a very long time, out of fear of mispronouncing words or making grammatical errors. But in this course with Thomas, I've come to understand that making mistakes is perfectly normal. The crucial part is to understand why we make them and how to avoid them in the future. So let's be brave, let's practice together, and let's make the absolute most of this exceptional course to speak French fluently. That's a magnificent start, I said. So settle in, take your notes, and prepare for a truly integrated linguistic experience. We will start immediately with pronunciation, as it is the absolute foundation for speaking French clearly and fluently. Let's go, together. Indeed, we are now diving directly into pronunciation, which serves as the bedrock of all oral expression in the French language. I want to particularly emphasize this section because it is utterly fundamental for effective communication, for making yourself easily understood, and for building your self-confidence as a speaker. All too often, we tend to believe that pronunciation is a secondary concern, or that certain errors can simply be glossed over. This is true to some extent, but in reality, clear pronunciation simplifies your daily life immensely. When you articulate French clearly, people understand you better, they interact with you more easily, and your anxieties about speaking in public diminish significantly. Therefore, I want to dedicate ample time to help you master the key sounds of the French language and feel completely at ease with them. The very first thing to grasp is that French is a language characterized by distinct sounds, including the famous nasal sounds, open vowels, closed vowels, and of course, the distinctive French R that frequently poses a challenge for many learners. We will unravel all of this together, step by step. I will begin by focusing on the vowel sounds. Then we'll move on to the most important consonant sounds. But first, Laura, as a learner yourself, could you tell us which French sounds caused you the most difficulty when you first started learning? Certainly, Thomas, with great pleasure, she replied. So, honestly, I believe, like many learners, that the hardest thing for me at the beginning was the nasal sounds, such as n, on, and in, primarily because they don't exist in my native language. This frustrated me a lot because I was always afraid of sounding ridiculous when trying to pronounce them. The other major difficulty was, of course, the famous French R. I never quite knew if I was supposed to vibrate my throat, roll my tongue, or simply pronounce it in some other entirely different way. What I ultimately found most challenging was finding enough examples or exercises effectively practice these specific sounds. But I must say, seeing you explain them and hearing them regularly in sentences or in real-life conversations has made them clearer and easier for me little by little. I really think the secret lies in regular practice, slowly at first and then gradually speeding up. I also noticed that by deliberately exaggerating the pronunciation of the sounds in the beginning, you gain a much better understanding of how to articulate them. For example, the and sound in words like mane or enfant. I exaggerated it for a long time until it became more natural. But I'm very eager to hear your specific advice on these points. You've just hit on something extremely important, Laura, I noted. Exaggerating sounds initially to master them later is precisely the strategy I advise all my students, and one I recommend to you, our listener, as well. When you're learning pronunciation, it's crucial to slow down, listen carefully, and then slightly over-articulate each sound. This way, your mouth, your lips, your tongue, and even your ears become accustomed to these new sounds. Once you feel more comfortable, you'll gradually be able to produce these sounds more naturally. Now, let's delve into the nasal vowels you mentioned, Laura. In French, there are 4 primary nasal vowels: the an sound, as in manger, the on sound, as in maison, the un sound, as in lundi, and the in sound, as in vin. The distinctive characteristic of these sounds is that they are produced by allowing air to pass not only through your mouth, but also slightly through your nose. That's what defines a nasal vowel. Here's how to practice these sounds. For the an sound, imagine opening your mouth slightly and letting air flow through both your mouth and your nose. You can try it with me. Un, manger, enfant, banque français. Try repeating these words slowly. The on sound is quite similar, but it's a little more closed. You bring your lips together slightly. En, maison, bonbon, citron. The un sound and the in sound are often confused. The difference is subtle yet important. The un sound, as in lundi, is slightly more open than the in sound, as in vin. Let's listen to them together. Lundi, brun, parfum, un. And now the in sound, as in vin, pain, train, chemin. Laura, do you really perceive this subtle difference between these last 2 sounds, un and in? Yes, it's clear, Thomas, she confirmed. Now that you've pronounced them so distinctly, it's much more obvious. I admit I used to mix them up a lot before, especially when I was speaking quickly or when I felt a bit stressed. But hearing each sound very slowly, with several different examples, helps tremendously. For the listeners, I strongly recommend repeating each set of examples multiple times, just as Thomas has done. This not only helps you memorize these sounds, but also gets you used to how your mouth moves to pronounce them correctly. I have a quick question, Thomas. For someone learning alone, how do you know exactly if you're pronouncing sounds correctly or not? Do you have any practical tips for checking your own pronunciation when you don't have a teacher with you every day? That's an excellent question, Laura, I replied. Indeed, many learners harbor this uncertainty. How can I be sure I'm pronouncing well in the absence of a teacher? Fortunately, there are several simple and effective tips for checking your pronunciation, even when you're working independently. The first is to record your voice with your phone or computer as you repeat these sounds. Then listen to yourself and compare it precisely with my voice or with the voice of a native speaker you can easily find on YouTube or in French podcasts. You'll often notice the differences immediately. The second tip is to use your phone's or computer's speech recognition feature. Try dictating sentences that contain these difficult sounds. If your device understands what you're saying correctly, that's usually a good sign. If it doesn't, it immediately highlights which sounds will pose a problem for French speakers. And finally, also try speaking slowly at first, without tension. Slowing down makes it easier to hear the differences in sounds, and thus improves your pronunciation. It's exactly like learning a musical instrument. You start slowly, practice regularly, and then gradually speed up. The most important thing is not to get discouraged. French pronunciation might seem difficult at first, but with a little regular practice, it quickly becomes easier and more natural. Repeat a few sentences slowly every day, recording yourself or listening carefully. You'll be amazed at the rapid progress you'll make. And now, Laura, are you ready to move on to the next step? The pronunciation of the famous French R, the sound that intimidates so many learners? Yes, Thomas, I am absolutely ready to tackle the famous French R, Laura affirmed with determination. I'm sure everyone learning French has faced this challenge at least once. I still remember the first few months of my French learning journey, wondering if I would ever be able to pronounce this sound correctly. At that time, mastering this R seemed almost impossible, and I feared that people wouldn't understand me well because of it. I know I'm not alone. Many learners feel the same way. Personally, what helped me was regularly practicing with simple, short words like rouge, red, riz, rice, and rue, street. Then gradually moving on to more complex words like raconter, to tell, reflet, reflection, and regarder, to watch. I recall spending hours in front of my mirror, repeating these words to observe exactly what my mouth was doing when I produced this specific sound. Initially, the sound was very exaggerated, very slow, and even funny at times, but gradually I understood how to pronounce it naturally. Thomas, could you technically explain how to pronounce the famous French R and perhaps offer some practical tips or exercises to easily integrate it into our speech? With great pleasure, Laura, because you're touching upon a pivotal point in learning spoken French, I responded. Indeed, the French R is often perceived as one of the most complex sounds, but it shouldn't become an insurmountable obstacle for you. I will explain precisely how to produce this sound step by step and provide you with practical exercises to easily practice it at home, starting today. First, it's essential to understand that the French R is pronounced in the throat, at the very back of the mouth. It's not a sound produced with the tip of the tongue, unlike the R in Spanish or Italian, for example. To pronounce it correctly, imagine you want to gently vibrate the back of your throat a little. It's not a very strong vibration, but a slight friction in the throat. I advise you to start by pronouncing this sound in isolation, without placing it in a word. Just try to say R several times in a row, slowly. R, R, R. You should feel a slight vibration in the back of your throat, as if you were gargling water very gently. Once you grasp this sensation, you can move on to simple words. Let's start, for example, with roux, rouge, riz, rêve, roi. Say them slowly, focusing on the R sound at the beginning. If you feel you can't immediately produce this vibration, don't despair. One excellent trick is to imagine you're mimicking a very soft cat's purr, but without too much exaggeration. This image might seem funny, but it's very effective for feeling the correct position in the throat. Then, try pronouncing words with the R inside. Parler, marcher, travailler, dormir, partir. Again, take your time, exaggerate the sound slightly at first, then pronounce the words more quickly as you gain fluidity. Another very effective exercise is to repeat short sentences that contain the R sound multiple times. For example, you can repeat the following sentence several times slowly, then quickly. Robert regarde rarement la rue. Robert rarely looks at the street. Try it too. Le renard roux se promène dans la rue. The red fox walks in the street. These sentences might seem difficult at first, but if you repeat them regularly, you'll see that your pronunciation will become very well structured. Laura, I'd like to know how you currently practice this sound yourself. Do you use any specific tips or techniques to maintain good pronunciation of the R? Yes, Thomas, absolutely, Laura confirmed. And by the way, thank you so much for these precise explanations and exercises. Personally, to continue practicing regularly, I've adopted some very practical small habits in my daily life. The first is that I regularly listen to podcasts in French where speakers talk naturally and clearly. I make it a habit to repeat some sentences aloud after hearing them. This allows me to stay connected to this sound and not lose the habit of pronouncing it correctly. Then, I try to speak regularly with native speakers or French-speaking partners, even if it's only for 10 or 15 minutes a day. I particularly insist on pronouncing the R clearly, especially in words or sentences that I know are challenging for me. I often ask the person I'm speaking with to correct my pronunciation if they hear something odd. I find that this allows me to get a very clear idea of the aspects that still need improvement. And finally, I also practice by recording myself, as you suggested earlier. It's very simple, but incredibly effective. I record short sentences. Usually, when I listen to myself, I can immediately identify the moments when the R pronunciation isn't clear enough, or conversely, when it's just right. This allows me to self-assess and adjust my pronunciation directly. I'd like to add something important for those listening to us. In the beginning, it wasn't easy, and that's perfectly normal. But what I've noticed is that by practicing these simple exercises regularly, even if only for 5 or 10 minutes a day, the R sound gradually becomes much, much easier. Don't get discouraged and don't hesitate to repeat constantly. Pronunciation is, in fact, a matter of regularity. Thomas, you were talking earlier about consonants in general. Could you now give us some general advice on how to pronounce consonants clearly in French, beyond just the R, to improve our listeners' comprehension? With pleasure, Laura, because it's absolutely crucial, I affirmed. Pronouncing consonants clearly in French is essential for comprehension. These are what distinctly define the meaning of words and sentences. The first and very important general rule is to articulate each consonant well. In French, every consonant should be pronounced clearly, even if sometimes subtly. For example, consonants like T, D, P, B, K, and G must be distinct and crisp. To practice, you can do very simple exercises, such as repeating similar words that change by only one consonant. This allows you to get used to clearly distinguishing between sounds and thus avoid confusion. Next, for consonants like S and Z, it's important to differentiate them clearly. The S sound is usually unvoiced, as in sac, sol, soleil. The Z vibrates a little more, as in zero, zoo, maison. Many learners confuse them without realizing it, and this can create misunderstandings. I advise you to practice slowly with a series of words containing these sounds to better recognize their differences. Finally, don't forget the final consonants in French. While often silent when they are pronounced, it's crucial to articulate them very clearly. For instance, the final consonant in petit is silent, but we pronounce the T in petite. These subtle differences completely change the meaning and are essential for native speakers to understand you well. Laura, do these explanations help you understand why some consonants can sometimes be difficult for learners? Yes, absolutely, Thomas, she responded. It's perfectly clear now. I'm sure it will benefit everyone immensely, including myself. These detailed explanations make me realize the importance of listening carefully to each sound, and then taking the time to practice it slowly. Thank you so much for this specific advice. Excellent. Now that we've laid the essential foundations for pronunciation, it's time to move on to another aspect, grammar. I know what's probably going through your mind. Oh no, grammar is complicated. But don't worry, that's absolutely not the goal of this section. Today, we're going to simplify grammar together to make it easier for you to understand what you're learning and, most importantly, to apply it directly. You'll notice that with just a few simple rules, French grammar can become much more manageable and empowering. The first point I want to discuss with you today concerns genders, masculine and feminine in French. Indeed, this is often one of the most challenging aspects for learners, especially when their native language doesn't have this distinction. In French, every noun has a gender, either masculine or feminine, and this gender impacts articles, adjectives, pronouns, and sometimes even verbs. Many learners make mistakes on this point, and that's perfectly normal at the beginning. But fortunately, there are practical tips to help you identify and remember these genders better. For example, nouns ending in ite are typically feminine. Of course, there are exceptions like livre, book, which is masculine. Conversely, many nouns ending in a consonant or other vowels are often masculine. Another incredibly useful tip is to learn nouns directly with their articles. If you adopt this habit from the very beginning, you will automatically memorize the gender of words along with the vocabulary itself. Laura, as an active French learner, how do you approach this gender challenge in your daily learning? Have you implemented any specific strategies? Is it possible to remember whether a word is masculine or feminine better? Yes, Thomas, absolutely, Laura replied. Identifying gender is indeed a significant challenge when learning French. Personally, I hesitated for a long time on some words, and I still make a few mistakes even today. But there are simple strategies I've applied that have helped me a lot to remember gender better. The first thing I do is exactly what you advised. I systematically learn words with their article from the very beginning. For example, when I learn the word car, voiture, I never learn it alone. I always say la voiture or une voiture. Similarly, for a word like coffee shop, café, I always learn it as le café or un café. This simple habit helps my brain instantly associate the gender with the word itself. As a result, by practicing this way, I memorize the gender automatically without having to consciously think about it. Another method I use regularly is to create vocabulary lists organized by gender. For instance, I'll have one list for all the new feminine words I learn in a day or a week, and another list for masculine words. Grouping them together this way makes it easier for me to memorize them visually. It might seem basic, but it works perfectly for me. I also often try to use the new words I learn in complete sentences, because I've found that using the word directly in context, with an adjective or an article, reinforces my memory of its gender. For example, instead of just learning maison, I'll say to myself, la grande maison blanche, the big white house. It quickly becomes natural for me to remember that maison is feminine. I'd like to add something important for listeners. If you still make mistakes with gender, don't get frustrated or discouraged. Even native French speakers, when learning another language, also struggle with these concepts. The most important thing is to practice regularly and internalize these simple, tried and true habits. All the best, Laura. That's an excellent point, Laura. Now, let's move on to another fundamental and often tricky aspect of French grammar: articles, both definite and indefinite. In French, the definite articles are le for masculine singular, la for feminine singular, and les for plural, both masculine and feminine. These articles are used when you're talking about something specific or something that is already known. For example, if I say je cherche le livre, I'm looking for the book, I'm referring to a particular book that the person I'm speaking with probably already knows about. Conversely, the indefinite articles are un for masculine singular, une for feminine singular, and des for plural. These articles are used when you're talking about something unspecified or undefined. For instance, if I say je cherche un livre, I'm looking for a book, it means I'm looking for any book without specifying which one. There's another important distinction concerning the plural indefinite article des. Learners often don't precisely know how to use it. In fact, des simply means some or several and is used when talking about an imprecise quantity in the plural form. For example, the phrase j'ai des amis simply means I have some friends, without specifying their exact number. It's very important to use this article correctly because without it, your sentence might sound incorrect or strange to a native French speaker. I'll also quickly explain a very useful small rule regarding the linking of articles in the plural form. In French, when the definite article le is followed by a word starting with a vowel or a silent H, we must create a liaison, which means we pronounce the S of le like a Z sound. For example, les amis, the friends, is pronounced les amis, not les amis. This simple precision is essential for fluid and natural pronunciation in French. Laura, I'd like to know how you personally deal with definite and indefinite articles in your daily practice. Have you encountered any particular difficulties? Yes, absolutely, Thomas, Laura confirmed. I certainly had difficulties initially with these articles. In particular, I didn't always understand the difference between when to use a definite article versus an indefinite one. What helped me a lot was trying to translate or understand why I was using one article or the other in a specific sentence. For example, if I wanted to say, I want the book or I want a book, I would regularly ask myself, am I talking about a specific book or am I talking about just any book? This simple, systematic reflection helped me grasp the subtle difference between these two types of articles. Another very useful thing for me was listening extensively to native French speakers in real-life situations, such as podcasts, movies, and even YouTube videos. I would listen carefully to how they used articles in their sentences, and then I would try to mimic their sentences myself by repeating them aloud. Finally, for the liaison, linking sentences you mentioned, I found it very helpful to practice very short sentences or phrases repeatedly, like les amis, the friends, les enfants, the children, les écoles, the schools. By repeating them aloud many times, I got used to making that liaison naturally, almost automatically. It's a habit now. I no longer need to think about it. But it's true that it required an intensive practice period at the beginning. In summary, my main strategies were to listen carefully to native speakers, repeat aloud, and quickly think about the context in which I was using the article. With these three approaches combined, I feel my understanding has improved significantly. Very good. Now that you're more comfortable with genders and articles, it's time to address another fundamental component of French grammar: adjectives. Adjectives are essential because they allow you to describe, express feelings, give opinions, and specify what you're talking about. In French, they are not always placed in the same spot as in English or Spanish, and above all, they must agree in gender and number with the noun they modify. Errors often appear here, especially in spoken language. Let's take a very simple example. Un homme intelligent, an intelligent man. Here, the adjective intelligent is masculine singular because it agrees with homme, man. But if you say une femme intelligente, an intelligent woman, the adjective takes an E at the end to indicate the feminine form. This is a basic but essential rule. This E doesn't always change the pronunciation, but it's important in writing. Now, if we speak in the plural, we say des hommes intelligents, intelligent men, or des femmes intelligentes, intelligent women. Then we add an S or ES to the adjective, even if it's not always pronounced orally. You must master these rules to avoid grammatical errors and speak more precisely. There's also another important nuance: the position of the adjective in the sentence. In French, the majority of adjectives are placed after the noun. Unlike English, for example, we say une voiture rouge, a red car, and not une rouge voiture. However, some very short, very common, or subjective adjectives are placed before the noun. For example, un petit chien, a small dog, une belle maison, a beautiful house, un vieux livre, an old book. These are frequent exceptions. Yes, Thomas, of course, Laura interjected. To be honest, adjectives were a real headache for me at first. In my native language, we don't change the adjective based on gender or number, so I tended to completely forget the agreement. For example, I would often say une femme intelligente or des maisons petites. I didn't realize it immediately, But little by little, by speaking more with native speakers or reading texts in French, I noticed that these errors often reappeared in my expression. What helped me a lot was creating a kind of agreement chart. I put example sentences in the masculine, feminine, singular, and plural. For example, un garçon gentil, a kind boy, une fille gentille, a kind girl, des garçons gentils, kind boys, des filles gentilles, kind girls. Then I repeated these sentences aloud several times a week until they became automatic. It might seem repetitive, but it really helped me internalize the rules better. Regarding the position of adjectives, that was confusing for me at the beginning too. I wanted to say une rouge voiture, as in English, but I quickly realized it wasn't natural at all in French. Fortunately, there are lists of adjectives that are placed before the noun, as you mentioned, like beau, beautiful, grand, tall, big, petit, small, jeune, young, etc. Knowing these exceptions allowed me to memorize these special cases better. I think the best advice I can give learners is to always learn adjectives that include a noun. For example, instead of just learning content, happy, learn un garçon content, a happy boy, or une fille contente, a happy girl. It's more effective, more logical, and easier to remember. And most importantly, the secret lies in regular practice. That's how I managed to improve. Thomas, can we now see how to build simple sentences with all these elements? Articles, nouns, adjectives. Because I think many people, like me, would like concrete examples of correct sentences to use in their daily lives. Once you understand the basic rules of articles, nouns, and adjectives, the next logical step is to construct simple but complete sentences, I explained. I'll show you how to do this in 3 very simple steps. First, start with a clear subject. The subject is the who or what that performs the action. It can be a pronoun like je, I, tu, you, il, he, elle, she, nous, we, vous, you, plural, formal, il, they, masculine, or elle, they, feminine. It can also be a noun, le garçon, the boy, ma sœur, my sister, le professeur, the teacher. Second, add a verb. This is the action performed by the subject. The most common verbs are être, to be, avoir, to have, aller, to go, faire, to do, make. Other frequently used verbs include manger, to eat, parler, to speak, vivre, to live, etc. The verb must always be conjugated in the correct tense and person. Third, add a complement or an adjective. This helps to clarify the idea. We can add a direct object, an adjective, a place, a time, etc. Here are some very simple examples. Je suis fatigué. I am tired. Il a un grand chien. He has a big dog. Nous parlons français tous les jours. We speak French every day. Marie est une étudiante enthousiaste. Marie is an enthusiastic student. Vous avez une belle voiture rouge. You have a beautiful red car. In all these sentences, you can observe that the subject, verb, and complements are well organized, and the adjectives agree perfectly in gender and number. A fantastic exercise you can do at home is to use a vocabulary word you've just learned in 3 different sentences. For example, if you learn the word heureux, you can say, Je suis heureux. I am happy. Elle est heureuse aujourd'hui. She is happy today. Ils sont très heureux de leurs résultats. They are very happy with their results. This repetition not only allows you to learn, but also reinforces your grammatical skills. Laura, do you practice this type of exercise in your learning routine? Can you share with us how you create your own sentences to practice speaking and writing in French? Yes, absolutely, Laura confirmed. It's actually a method I use daily. I have a small notebook where I jot down whatever I want, and I always try to use it in at least 2 or 3 different sentences. I write the sentence, read it aloud, then repeat it from memory without looking. Then I write it again, but changing the subject or the context. For example, if I'm learning the word rapide, I'll say, Ce train est très rapide. This train is very fast. Mon frère est rapide quand il court. My brother is fast when he runs. It's a simple and extremely effective exercise. And what I particularly like about it is that it helps me better understand how verb conjugations work and the placement of words in a sentence. I realize that the more I do this exercise, the easier it becomes for me to speak without hesitation. Another tip I can offer is to always read these sentences aloud. I don't just speak silently, but in fact, speaking aloud is a great way to develop fluency, confidence, and pronunciation all at once. Even if you're alone at home, it's very beneficial. And if you have a language partner, it's even better. You can share your sentences and correct each other. When you feel comfortable building simple sentences with the correct word order, appropriate articles, and accurate adjectives, it's time to address a cornerstone of the French language, verbs and their conjugations, I continued. We'll start with the present indicative because it's the most frequently used tense in spoken language and allows you to talk about yourself, your habits, and what you see. Many learners dread French verb conjugations. They find them long, irregular, and complex. And it's true that, compared to English or other languages, French verb conjugation requires a little more rigor. But it's not as difficult as you might think. You just need to understand the logic, and above all, start with the right verbs, quickly, in many situations. So, we'll look together at the most common verbs in the present tense, starting with the four absolutely essential verbs: être, to be; avoir, to have; aller, to go; and faire, to do, make. They are irregular, but you absolutely must memorize them by heart because they appear in almost every conversation. Let's begin with the verb être. I'll give you its conjugation, Laura, and then we'll use it in practical examples. It's a fundamental verb for describing things, people, situations, or for expressing identity. For example, nous sommes en retard, we are late. Tu es gentil, you are kind. Ils sont heureux, they are happy. Laura, do you remember when you first learned this verb? How did you train yourself to remember it and use it in your daily life? Yes, I remember it very well, Laura responded. It was one of the first verbs I encountered in my classes, and I immediately thought, okay, I'm starting to see it in almost all these sentences, the simple ones. So for me, it was an absolute priority. What I did was write it out by hand, many times, in columns to memorize its forms well. Then I enjoyed creating very short sentences. Tu es étudiant, you are a student. Il est très français, he is very French. Nous sommes ensemble, we are together, etc. I would say them aloud every morning for a few minutes, and by repeating them, I no longer needed to think about them. I also noticed that this verb is very useful for asking questions. Es-tu prêt? Are you ready? Es-tu contente? Are you happy? Etc. It's a fantastic tool for interacting with others. And what I would advise other learners is to create their own personal examples. It's more motivating and sticks in your memory better. An excellent strategy, Laura, I agreed. And you're absolutely right. Using sentences that are personally relevant to you is the best way to memorize. Now, let's look at the verb avoir, to have, which is equally essential. Here's its conjugation. J'ai, I have; tu as, you have; il, elle, una, he, she, one has; nous avons, we have; vous avez, you have plural formal; ils, elles, ont, they have. This verb is fundamental for expressing possession, talking about age, and desires. It's also an auxiliary verb, used to form other tenses, such as the passé composé. But we'll come back to that later. Let's look at some very simple examples. J'ai une voiture. I have a car. As-tu des enfants? Do you have children? Il a un travail intéressant. He has an interesting job. Nous avons une réunion demain. We have a meeting tomorrow. Vous avez faim? Are you hungry? Ils ont peur du noir. They are afraid of the dark. There are also many fixed expressions with avoir that beginners often forget. For example, avoir froid, to be cold; avoir chaud, to be hot; avoir soif, to be thirsty; avoir besoin de; avoir envie de, to feel like, etc. These are very useful daily expressions. Laura, could you give us some examples of phrases you use with the verb avoir? Of course, Laura replied. This verb is everywhere. I use it every day. For example, j'ai faim et j'ai soif. I'm hungry and thirsty are phrases I say very often. Or also, j'ai envie de sortir. I feel like going out. J'ai besoin d'aide. I need help. And of course, when talking about one's age, j'ai 28 ans. I am 28 years old. At first, I was a bit confused because in my language, we say, I am 28 years old. But in French, we say, j'ai 28 ans. It took some time for my brain to understand that to talk about age, we use avoir and not être. But now, it's automatic. A small exercise I loved doing was writing down all the common expressions with avoir and then trying to use them in a personal diary. For example, j'ai eu chaud aujourd'hui. I was hot today. J'ai eu peur en regardant ce film. I was scared watching this movie, etc. It's very effective. That's a very good exercise, I confirmed. And now, let's move on to another essential verb, aller, to go. Here's its conjugation in the present tense. Je vais, I go. Tu vas, you go. Il, elle, on va. He, she, one goes. Nous allons, we go. Vous allez, you go plural formal. Ils, elles, vont, they go. This verb is useful for expressing movement or direction, but it's also invaluable for forming the future proche, which means saying what we are going to do very soon. For example, je vais à l'école. I'm going to school. Tu vas bien? Are you doing well? Elle va à la plage. She's going to the beach. Nous allons au cinéma ce soir. We're going to the cinema tonight. Où vas-tu? Where are you going? Ils vont à Paris demain. Going to Paris tomorrow. And for the future proche, je vais manger. I'm going to eat. Tu vas travailler. You're going to work. Il va appeler sa mère. He's going to call his mother. Nous allons faire des courses. We're going shopping. Vous allez étudier ce soir. You're going to study tonight. Ils vont regarder un film. They're going to watch a film. Laura, do you use the futur proche a lot with aller? How did you integrate it into your studies? Yes, very much so, Laura replied. I find that the futur proche, even if you don't master the future simple very well, is quick, simple, and very natural. For example, I often say, je vais dormir, I'm going to sleep, or je vais prendre une douche, I'm going to take a shower, or je vais appeler ma sœur, I'm going to call my sister. These are everyday phrases, so you can use them immediately without having to remember complex conjugations. One tip I can offer is to try thinking in French. When I plan my day in my head, I try to do it directly in French. Instead of saying, I will eat, or let's discuss it together, I say to myself, je vais manger, or je vais sortir, and so on. Even if it's just in my mind, it helps me create automatic reflexes. And also, when I hear someone use this type of sentence, I try to repeat it aloud or write it down in my notebook. It's an excellent method. And I urge all of you to follow Laura's lead, I added. Use the verbs you're learning to talk about your life, your projects, your daily routine. That's how you'll progress naturally. The last verb in this section is faire, to do, make. It's an extremely versatile verb in French. Here's its conjugation. Je fais, I do, make. Tu fais, you do, make. Il, elle, on fait. He, she, one does, makes. Nous faisons, we do, make. Vous faites, ils, elles font. It's a verb you'll use to talk about your activities, your work, your hobbies, the weather, and in many common expressions. Je fais du sport, I do sports. Vous faites la cuisine, you cook. Il fait froid aujourd'hui, it's cold today. Nous faisons un projet ensemble. We're working on a project together. Que faites-vous ce week-end? What are you doing this weekend? Elle fait du yoga le matin. She does yoga in the morning. Faire is everywhere, and you really need to master it. I also recommend creating a personal list of all the expressions you hear around this verb. Laura, before we move on, can you tell us what your favorite verb is among those we've just reviewed and why? Well, that's a good question, Laura pondered. My favorite is definitely aller, to go, because I use it constantly. It allows me to talk about the near future so easily, about what I'm going to do, and it gives me a sense of fluidity. It's also a verb I memorized quickly, so I always felt confident using it. But faire is also fantastic because it allows me to express so many things. Doing sports, doing my homework, making crepes. I think it's quintessentially French. In any case, these four verbs are the absolute foundation. If you master them, you can form hundreds of different sentences. It's the best possible base to continue building upon. Very good. Now that you're familiar with the four essential verbs in French, être, avoir, aller, faire, let's broaden our scope a bit and discover some other crucial verbs together. These verbs will enable you to express yourself with greater precision, ask questions, formulate your desires, abilities, and obligations, and also recount what you've heard, seen, or experienced. I'll start with a very useful verb that denotes movement, origin, or source. Venir, to come. Venir is an irregular but very common verb. Here's its conjugation in the present tense. Je viens, I come. Tu viens, you come. Il, elle, on vient. He, she, one comes. Nous venons, we come. Vous venez, you come, plural formal. Ils, elles viennent, they come. This verb is often used to talk about where one comes from or a journey in general. It's also used in very useful expressions like venir de infinitive, to have just done something, which allows us to express an action in the very recent past. We call this the passé récent, recent past. Here are some examples. Je viens de Paris. I come from Paris. Viens-tu avec nous? Are you coming with us? Elle vient de rentrer à la maison. She has just returned home. Nous venons te chercher. We're coming to pick you up. Venez-vous de manger? Have you just eaten? Ils viennent à la fête ce soir? Are they coming to the party tonight? And for the passé récent, je viens de finir mon travail. I've just finished my work. Tu viens de voir le film? You've just watched the film. Il vient de partir. He has just left. Laura, do you use this verb a lot in your daily life? Did you have difficulty mastering it at first? Yes, it's a verb I use very often, Laura replied, especially when I talk about my daily routine or when I want to describe something that just happened. For example, to express a very recent event, je viens de, is very natural and helps avoid overusing the passé composé at the beginning. What I found a bit difficult at first was not confusing venir and aller, because they are both related to travel. But by listening to native speakers and practicing dialogues, I learned to differentiate them well. A small tip I can offer is to write a short sentence with venir de infinitive every day. It's a natural way to talk about something we've just done. For example, je viens de prendre un café. I've just had a coffee. Or, je viens de terminer mon exercice. I've just finished my exercise. This allows us to review both the verb and vocabulary. That's valuable advice, Laura, I noted. Now, let's look at three other verbs together to express will, ability, and obligation. These are vouloir, to want, pouvoir, to be able to, can, and devoir, to have to, must. Let's start with vouloir. This verb expresses desire, intention. Here's its present tense conjugation. Je veux, I want. Tu veux, you want. Il, elle, on veut. He, she, one wants. Nous voulons, we want. Vous voulez, you want plural, formal. Ils, elles veulent, they want. It's a very common verb. We use it to ask for something, to make a request, to express what we wish to do. Here are some simple examples. Je veux apprendre le français. I want to learn French. Tu veux un café? Do you want a coffee? Il veut sortir ce soir. He wants to go out tonight. Nous voulons visiter la ville. We want to visit the city. Voulez-vous parler plus tard? Do you want to talk later? Laura, have you noticed that this verb is often used very politely with je voudrais, I would like to? Can you tell us more about that? Yes, indeed, Laura confirmed. It's something I learned very quickly because I often heard French people say je voudrais instead of je veux, even for the simplest things. For example, je voudrais un croissant. I would like a croissant. Instead of je veux un croissant. I want a croissant. And I understood that je voudrais is the polite form, derived from the conditional tense of vouloir. It allows you to make a request much more gently, which is crucial in French culture. So when I'm in a cafe or a shop, I always say je voudrais to order. And I see that people react much better. It's a simple trick that makes a big difference in sounding more natural and respectful. Exactly, I agreed. And now let's move on to pouvoir, to be able to, can. This verb expresses possibility or permission. Here's its conjugation. Je peux, I can. Tu peux, you can. Il, elle, on peut. Who, she, one can. Nous pouvons, we can. Vous pouvez, you can, plural formal. Ils, elles peuvent, they can. With this verb, we can say what we are capable of doing, what we are able to do, or what we are allowed to do. For instance, je peux parler un peu français. I can speak a little French. Tu peux venir avec moi? You can come with me. Il peut conduire. He can drive. Nous pouvons commencer. We can start. Pouvez-vous m'aider? Can you help me? Ils peuvent entrer. They can enter. And to ask a polite question, we often use est-ce que je peux? Can I? For example, est-ce que je peux utiliser ton stylo? Can I use your pen? Est-ce que je peux poser une question? Can I ask a question? Laura, would you like to share an anecdote or how you've used this verb in a real situation? Yes, Laura recounted. Once I was in a library in France and I wanted to sit in a chair that looked reserved. So I asked, est-ce que je peux m'asseoir ici? Can I sit here? The person smiled and said yes. I think if I had just said, je m'assois ici, I'm sitting here, without asking politely, it might have been a bit rude. So I understood that pouvoir is very useful for asking questions in daily life, but also for showing respect. I also use this verb a lot in my conversations with my French-speaking friends. For example, on peut répéter? Can we repeat? On peut sortir ce soir? Can we go out tonight? Etc. It's very practical. You're doing great, I praised. And finally, let's look at the verb devoir, to have to, must, which is used to express obligation or necessity. Here's its conjugation. Je dois, I must, have to. Tu dois, you must, have to. Il, elle, on doit, he, she, one must, has to. Nous devons, we must, have to. Vous devez, you must, have to, plural formal. Ils, elles doivent, they must, have to. Some examples to understand its use. Je dois étudier ce soir. I must study tonight. Tu dois être prudent. You must be careful. Il doit partir à 18 heures. He has to leave at 6 p.m. Nous devons préparer le dîner. We have to prepare dinner. Vous devez être à l'heure. You must be on time. Ils doivent finir le projet demain. They must finish the project tomorrow. It's a very useful verb for talking about responsibilities or important matters. It can be used in a personal, professional, or even academic context. Laura, do you feel a difference between saying je dois, I must, have to, and saying il faut, it is necessary to? Because they are two ways to express obligation, but they are not exactly identical. Yes, I have noticed that difference, Laura observed. When I say je dois, it's often more explicit and personal. For example, je dois finir ce travail. I must finish this work. It's my responsibility. Il faut, on the other hand, is more general, more impersonal. It can come from a rule, a situation, or even advice. For example, il faut que je me repose. I need to rest. It implies that it's necessary for my well-being, not necessarily an external obligation. In any case, I try to use both, but it's true that devoir is easier to master at first because the structure il faut que requires the subjunctive, which is more complex for me for now. And you're absolutely right, Laura, I affirmed. For beginners or intermediate learners, using the verb devoir is a great way to talk about obligations without diving directly into the subjunctive mood. We'll cover the subjunctive later, don't worry. Before we conclude this section, I'd like to mention two other very useful verbs, dire, to say, tell, and mettre, to put, place, where, both of which have many meanings depending on the context. Here's dire in the present tense. Je dis, tu dis, il, elle, on dit, nous disons, vous dites, ils, elles disent. And mettre in the present tense. Je mets, tu mets, il, elle, on met, nous mettons, vous mettez, ils, elles mettent. These two verbs are incredibly common. We say, je dis la vérité, I'm telling the truth. Tu dis souvent ça, you often say that. Il dit qu'il vient, he says he's coming. On dit toujours bonjour, we always say hello. Vous dites quelque chose? Are you saying something? Ils disent qu'ils sont prêts, they say they're ready. For mettre, je mets mon manteau, I put on my coat. Tu mets la table, you set the table. Elle met son sac ici, she puts her bag here. Nous mettons la musique, we put on the music. Vous mettez votre nom sur la liste? Are you putting your name on the list? Ils mettent une couverture chaude. Laura, can you give us examples of these last two verbs in your daily life? Of course, Laura replied. With dire, I often say, il a dit qu'il venait, he said he was coming, or je dis toujours merci, I always say thank you. And with mettre, I frequently use je mets mes écouteurs, I put on my headphones. Tu mets du sucre? Are you putting sugar in? Or on met la lumière, we turn on the light. These are verbs we hear everywhere, so they're easy to memorize if we listen carefully to native speakers' conversations. Excellent, Laura, I praised. So far, we've established solid foundations in the present tense, essential verbs, sentence structure, adjectives, and articles. But if we truly want to progress in French, we must now enter a new dimension, talking about the past. Because that's what we do constantly in real life. We talk about our day, a memory, an experience, a mistake, an emotion. And for this, there are two essential past tenses, the passé composé and the imparfait. The passé composé is used to express completed actions. It allows us to say what we did, what happened, a specific event. We use it when we can answer the question, what did you do yesterday? Or what happened? For example, if I say, hier, j'ai rencontré un ami. Yesterday, I met a friend. It's a specific, dated, and completed action. The imparfait, on the other hand, is used to describe a context, a habit, or a repeated action in the past. It's used to set the scene, to talk about what was there, what was happening in the background. For example, quand j'étais petit, je jouais dans le jardin. When I was little, I used to play in the garden. Or, il faisait beau, les oiseaux chantaient. The weather was beautiful, the birds were singing. These are descriptions, memories, and atmospheres. Laura, do you remember your first reaction when you discovered these two tenses? Did you understand them well from the start? Not at all, Laura confessed. To be honest, I found it very confusing. I had the impression that we used one sometimes and sometimes the other, without any logic. But one day, my teacher explained something very simple to me. He said, the passé composé is what you did. The imparfait is what it was like. And after that, everything became clear to me. From then on, I started writing short texts. For example, I recounted my day using the passé composé and described my childhood memories with the imparfait. Little by little, I began to feel the difference. Today, I no longer even think about it. It's become natural. That's exactly it, I agreed. You've summarized it perfectly, and it's a method I recommend to all learners. To practice, you can write 2 sentences every evening, one in the passé composé to say what you did today, and one in the imparfait to talk about a past habit or memory. The key is to practice a lot. Now let's talk about the formation of the passé composé. It's made up of two elements. First, an auxiliary verb in the present tense, either avoir or être, and then the past participle of the main verb. Let's take the verb manger, to eat. With the auxiliary avoir, we can say j'ai mangé, I ate, tu as mangé, you ate, il ou elle a mangé, he or she ate. Nous avons mangé, we ate, vous avez mangé, you ate, ils ou elles ont mangé, they ate. This tense is used to say things like ce matin, j'ai mangé un croissant. This morning, I ate a croissant. Or ils ont mangé au restaurant hier soir. They ate at the restaurant last night. But be careful. Some verbs use être as their auxiliary. This is the case for verbs of movement like aller, to go, venir, to come, entrer, to enter, sortir, to go out, monter, to go up, descendre, to go down, arriver, to arrive, partir, to leave. For example, je suis allé, I went. Tu es allé, you went. Il, elle est allé, he, she went. Nous sommes allés, we went. Vous êtes allés, you went. Ils, elles sont allés, they went. And with être, we must make the past participle agree in gender and number. So, if I say, elle est allée au marché, she went to the market, I add an e to the past participle for the feminine singular. Do you remember, Laura, the question of agreement in the passé composé with être? It's not always easy to remember. Yes, I remember it very well, Laura confirmed. It was quite overwhelming at first, but I discovered a trick that helped me a lot. I learned that there are about 15 verbs that use être as their auxiliary in the passé composé, and most of them are verbs of movement. There was a picture in my textbook of a house, and each room represented a verb: aller, venir, entrer, sortir, tomber, naître, mourir, etc. That image really struck me. And then I also understood that all reflexive verbs like se lever, to get up, se réveiller, to wake up, se laver, to wash oneself, are conjugated with être. For example, je me suis levé, I got up. Elle s'est réveillée, she woke up. Nous nous sommes habillés, we got dressed. And here, you also have to make the agreement. So, I made it a habit to always check if the subject was feminine or plural so I wouldn't forget the past participle agreement. That's exactly what you need to do, I said. And now that you're comfortable with the passé composé, let's look at the imparfait because it's very regular. To form the imparfait, we start with the new form of the verb in the present tense. For example, for the verb parler, to speak, we have nous parlons. We remove the on ending and keep the stem parle. Then we add the following endings: ais, ais, ait, ions, iez, aiet. So we say je parlais, I was speaking. Tu parlais, you were speaking. Il, elle, on parlait, he, she, one was speaking. Nous parlions, we were speaking. Vous parliez, you were speaking. Il, elle parlait, they were speaking. The same applies to other regular verbs like finir, to finish, or regarder, to watch. For example, je regardais la télévision. I was watching television. Nous regardions un film hier soir. We were watching a film last night. Il neigeait, il faisait froid, tout le monde portait des manteaux. It was snowing, it was cold, everyone was wearing coats. You see, the imparfait really allows you to describe an atmosphere, a memory, or an extended moment in the past. Laura, would you like to share some sentences you've written in the imparfait? Yes, with pleasure, Laura offered. I often write in my diary in French, and I love using the imparfait for that. For example, quand j'étais petite, je passais mes vacances chez ma grand-mère. Elle préparait des gâteaux tous les jours et nous jouions dans le jardin avec mes cousins, et le soir, nous regardions des dessins animés. When I was little, I used to spend my holidays at my grandmother's house. She used to bake cakes every day, and we would play in the garden with my cousins, and in the evening, we would watch cartoons. These are happy memories, and I find that the imparfait is perfect for recreating that atmosphere. And you're doing very well, I commended. What I suggest as an exercise is to combine the two tenses, using the imparfait to set the scene and the passé composé to express what happened. For example, il faisait beau, je marchais tranquillement, quand tout à coup j'ai vu un chat traverser la rue. It was beautiful. I was walking peacefully when all of a sudden I saw a cat cross the street. The imparfait describes the general atmosphere, while the passé composé indicates the specific event. With a little practice of both, you'll feel this difference and it will become natural. This is a significant step in your learning because from there you can tell stories, explain, and share your experiences in much greater detail. Very good. Now that we have a solid foundation in grammar, conjugation, and understanding tenses, it's time to move on to something extremely concrete and incredibly useful: daily phrases. These are the ready-made expressions, the short dialogues, the linguistic reflexes we use every day in real situations, in restaurants, hotels, at the doctor's, on the street, with a neighbor, in a shop. And this is precisely what allows you to survive in French and feel comfortable when you arrive in France or speak with a native speaker. We'll start with the absolute basics, introducing yourself. Laura, could you give us a short, simple introduction as if you were meeting someone for the first time? Yes, of course, Laura responded. I would say something like, Bonjour, je m'appelle Laura, je suis du Mexique, j'ai 28 ans, j'habite à Paris depuis 6 mois, je travaille dans une école de langue. J'apprends le français parce que j'adore la culture française. Hello, my name is Laura. I am from Mexico. I am 28 years old. I have been living in Paris for 6 months. I work in a language school. I am learning French because I love French culture. That's roughly what I would say. Every time I meet someone, it's very effective. Then, if the person asks me questions, I can add other things. Je parle anglais et un peu italien. I speak English and a little Italian. Or, je suis passionné par la cuisine et la photographie. I am passionate about cooking and photography. That's a very clear introduction, I affirmed. You see, to learn how to introduce yourself, you just need to construct a few simple sentences with the following elements: your first name, your nationality or country of origin, your age, where you live, what you do for work, and why you are learning French. Then you can add 1 or 2 personal pieces of information. I often advise my students to write their introduction on a piece of paper, then practice it aloud several times a day for a week. It's an excellent exercise for memorization and pronunciation. Now let's move on to another context: asking for information on the street or in the city. Laura, imagine you're lost in Paris. You want to ask for the nearest metro station. What would you say? I would say, Excusez-moi, où est la station de métro la plus proche? Excuse me, where is the nearest metro station? Laura offered. Or, Bonjour, je cherche la station Saint-Michel. Pouvez-vous m'aider? Hello, I'm looking for Saint-Michel station. Can you help me? And if I wanted to be even more polite, I could say, Pourriez-vous m'indiquer la direction? Could you tell me the way? That's perfect, I confirmed. The important thing is to start with a polite phrase, such as Excusez-moi, bonjour, s'il vous plaît. In France, we take this very seriously. After that, you can simply ask your question. Other useful examples: Où est la gare? Where is the train station? Comment puis-je aller à la place de la République? How can I get to Place de la République? Or, y a-t-il une pharmacie près d'ici? Is there a pharmacy nearby? Let's move on to another common situation: going to a restaurant. Laura, when you arrive at a restaurant in France, what's your first sentence? I would start by saying, Bonjour, j'ai une réservation au nom de Laura Perez. Hello, I have a reservation under the name Laura Perez, she replied. Excellent. Then, to order, you can say, Je vais prendre une salade. I'll have a salad. Or, Pour moi, ce sera le poulet. For me, it will be the chicken. Or, je voudrais un café, s'il vous plaît. I would like a coffee, please. And at the end of the meal, you can say, l'addition, s'il vous plaît. The bill, please. Or, puis-je payer par carte? Can I pay by card? These are very simple expressions, but they are very impactful because they allow for smooth and natural interaction. Now, let's look at another very classic scenario, shopping in a store. Laura, you want to buy a black t-shirt. What do you say to the salesperson? I'm looking for a black t-shirt, size M, Laura began. If I want to try it on, I ask, puis-je l'essayer? Can I try it on? And if I like it, I buy it. Or if I want to know the price, quel est le prix? What's the price? Or combien ça coûte? How much does it cost? Good, I acknowledged. And if you want to ask a question about a product, you can also say, avez-vous ce modèle en bleu? Do you have this model in blue? Or, quelle est votre taille? What's your size? And to pay, just like in restaurants, you can say, puis-je payer par carte? Can I pay by card? Or simply, je paie en espèces. I'll pay cash. Another place where common phrases are very useful is at the hotel. Laura, you've arrived at the hotel reception to check in. What do you say? I say, bonjour, j'ai une réservation au nom de Laura Perez. Hello, I have a reservation under the name Laura Perez. Reiterated. And if I wanted to book directly, I could say, je voudrais réserver une chambre pour 2 personnes pour 3 nuits. I would like to book a room for 2 people for 3 nights. Then I could ask, le petit déjeuner est-il inclus? Is breakfast included? Or, quelle est l'heure du départ? What time is checkout? Exactly, I affirmed. And if you need anything, puis-je avoir une serviette supplémentaire? Can I have an extra towel? Or, y a-t-il du Wi-Fi dans la chambre? Is there Wi-Fi in the room? We'll finish this section with another very useful place, at the doctor's office or the pharmacy. Laura, you're not feeling well. What do you say to the doctor? I would say, bonjour, je ne me sens pas bien. J'ai mal à la tête depuis 2 jours. Hello, I don't feel well. I've had a headache for 2 days. Or, j'ai de la fièvre et je tousse. I have a fever and I'm coughing. And if I were at the pharmacy, avez-vous quelque chose pour le mal de gorge? Do you have something for a sore throat? Or, je cherche un médicament sans ordonnance. I'm looking for an over-the-counter medicine. Excellent, I praised. You just need to know a few key phrases. J'ai mal à, I have pain in, followed by a body part. La tête, head, l'estomac, stomach, la gorge, throat. And if you want to explain a symptom, say, je suis fatigué, I'm tired. Je ne dors pas bien, I don't sleep well. Je suis stressé, I'm stressed. In short, these daily phrases are fundamental. They allow you to function in real life and interact without barriers, even with limited vocabulary. I advise you to write these phrases in a notebook, repeat them aloud constantly, and even act them out like a small play. Imagine you're in a restaurant, a shop, or on the other street, and repeat them over and over. That's how you'll progress quickly. And now, Laura, we're entering a world I truly love, the world of idiomatic expressions. These are ready-made, colorful, and sometimes a bit strange expressions that we hear everywhere in daily life. They represent the difference between someone who speaks textbook French and someone who speaks French fluently and naturally. As you know, you might have perfect grammar and good vocabulary, but if you don't know these expressions, you're missing out on how French people truly express themselves. Yes, I completely agree with you, Laura concurred. I used to be so frustrated. I didn't understand anything at all. I thought marre was a noun or an object, and in reality, j'en ai marre means I'm fed up with this situation, I've had enough. It's strange how these little phrases pop up all the time. Now I hear them every day. French people love these expressions, and I find that this is what makes the language so much more vibrant and rich. You're absolutely right, I said. I suggest we quickly look together at about 20 very common expressions that you absolutely must know to better understand native speakers and to be able to gradually use them yourself. We'll start with the most famous one, the one you just mentioned. J'en ai marre, I'm fed up. It means we're tired, that we've had enough. For example, j'en ai marre de ce travail, I'm fed up with this job. Or, j'en ai marre d'attendre, I'm fed up with waiting. We can also say j'en ai ras-le-bol. It's even stronger. Yes, and sometimes I say je n'en peux plus. I can't take it anymore when I'm really exhausted, Laura added. For example, j'ai trop de devoirs. Je n'en peux plus. I have too much homework. I can't take it anymore. Exactly, I affirmed. Then there's another expression we hear a lot, which is ça marche. It's a simple way to say okay or it works. If someone says rendez-vous à 18h, meet at 6 p.m., you can reply ça marche. It's effective. I love it, Laura said. It's so practical. It's like saying, okay, no problem. And French people use it all the time, even in written messages. Yes, I agreed. Another classic expression is être crevé. It means to be extremely tired. We often say, je suis crevé, I'm exhausted, or elle est crevée, she's exhausted. It's a colloquial phrase, but very common. Yes, I use it a lot after a long day, Laura confirmed. After a long day, I say, j'ai trop travaillé aujourd'hui, je suis crevé. I worked too much today, I'm exhausted. You see, you're already very natural, I praised. And another expression I like is être en pleine forme. It's the opposite of feeling tired. If you say, je suis en pleine forme aujourd'hui, I'm in great shape today, it means you're feeling good, full of energy. It's funny because I heard it recently, Laura recounted. Someone said to me, tu es en pleine forme ce matin. You're in great shape this morning. And I didn't understand why they were talking about fruit, but now I know. And there's also avoir la patate, isn't there? Yes, exactly, I confirmed. Avoir la patate, avoir la pêche, or even avoir la banane. These are all expressions that mean you're happy, full of energy. We use a lot of food imagery in French to express emotions. And a very useful one is c'est pas grave. We use it to say it's no big deal or it's okay. For example, désolé, je suis en retard. Sorry, I'm late. The other person replies, c'est pas grave. I find it very polite, helps diffuse the situation. I use it when someone makes a mistake or when I want to reassure someone, Laura added. Exactly, I said. And in the same vein, you have t'inquiète, which means don't worry, but in a faster, more familiar version. Yes, I've heard that a lot, Laura noted. T'inquiète, tout va bien se passer. Don't worry, everything will be fine. It's a reassuring expression. It's very useful among friends. Let's continue with an expression that's a bit strange, but very common. Ça me saoule. This means something is annoying us, bothering us. For example, ce bruit me saoule. This noise is annoying me. It's colloquial, not to be used in a very formal setting, but very common in spoken language. Yes, and I've also heard il est relou and elle est relou, which means the person is annoying or boring, Laura observed. I think it's lourde in Verlan, isn't it? Bravo, I exclaimed. You've even mastered Verlan. Yes, relou comes from lourde, heavy, and it's used to say that someone or something is annoying or tiresome. For example, il parle trop, il est relou. He talks too much, he's annoying. Would you like to continue with some expressions you enjoy using? Yes, of course, Laura replied. I really like c'est dingue. It's crazy, incredible, to say that something is mad or unbelievable. I often say, c'est dingue ce qu'il a dit. It's crazy what he said. Or, c'est dingue comme il pleut aujourd'hui. It's crazy how much it's raining today. And I also like ça me dit quelque chose. That rings a bell, sounds familiar. To say that I feel like I know something or recognize it. For example, ce nom me dit quelque chose. That name rings a bell. You're a real French woman, I praised. Other useful expressions to know. Avoir un coup de cœur. To fall in love with something, to have a crush on something. To say you've fallen in love with something you really like. For example, j'ai eu un coup de cœur pour ce film. I fell in love with this film. And another expression we hear a lot, ça ne me regarde pas, which means it's none of my business or I don't want to get involved. And I also heard people say, tu te trompes complètement. For example, tu crois qu'il est en colère? Do you think he's angry? Non, tu te trompes complètement. No, you're completely wrong. Exactly, Laura confirmed. And to finish this section, Here's a short series of very simple and very common expressions. C'est nul. It's bad, lame, if you don't like something. C'est génial. It's great, if you're very happy. C'est sérieux. It's serious, if you agree. And of course, c'est pas possible. It's impossible to express surprise. I love them, Laura said. These are the expressions that have allowed me to effectively integrate into conversations. Even if my level wasn't perfect, just knowing them gave me more confidence. And now you're all in the loop. These expressions are part of authentic French, the French we speak every day. So, for those listening to us, write some of them down, choose your favorites, and start using them today. You'll see that they will change everything in the way you speak French. Laura, after having delved into grammar, tenses, essential sentences, and idiomatic expressions, it's time to move on to a very fundamental element for truly progressing in the language: logical connectors. These are also called conjunctions or linking words. These small words allow you to link ideas together, give meaning, structure your discourse, make transitions, and add nuances to your remarks. They are small words or expressions like mais, but, par contre, on the other hand, en fait, in fact, donc, therefore, pourtant, however, d'ailleurs, by the way, en plus, what's more, au contraire, on the contrary, en revanche, on the other hand, tout d'abord, first of all, puis, then, and others. Each has a very specific function, and thanks to them, your French will begin to sound fluid and natural. You know, it's like building a house. Words and grammar are the structure, but connectors are what make ideas flow inside it, what gives it coherence. Without them, even with good vocabulary, speech sounds robotic or disconnected. Yes, I completely agree, Laura said. I remember that for a long time I spoke in simple sentences, but they were always a bit abrupt. I would link ideas together without any bridges, like j'aime le français, c'est difficile, je veux l'apprendre. I like French, it's difficult, I want to learn it. And one day I started using small words like mais or parce que, and it completely changed my way of speaking. For example, now I say j'aime le français, mais je trouve la grammaire difficile. I like French, but I find grammar difficult. Or, j'apprends le français parce que j'aime la culture. I'm learning French because I love the culture. It's simple, but it changes everything. You feel like you're mastering the language better, that you're thinking better, and that you're speaking more naturally. That's exactly the case, I affirmed. There are two very important types of connectors: those that express opposition, like but, and those that express cause, like because. Let's start with this. The simplest and most famous is, of course, mais. We use it to express opposition, a contrast between two ideas. For example, j'aime apprendre le français, mais je trouve ça difficile. I like learning French, but I find it difficult. It's probably the most used connector in spoken language. Then we have pourtant, however, which is a bit more formal, but we also hear it in speech. For example, j'ai étudié toute la soirée, pourtant je ne me sens pas prêt pour l'examen. I studied all evening, yet I don't feel ready for the exam. We can also use en revanche, on the other hand, or par contre, on the other hand. For example, il fait froid aujourd'hui, en revanche, il ne pleut pas. It's cold today, on the other hand, it's not raining. Or, ce restaurant est cher, par contre, il est excellent. This restaurant is expensive, however, it's excellent. Yes, I often heard par contre in conversations, Laura noted. It's very common, isn't it? Yes, absolutely, I confirmed. Par contre is used a lot in spoken language. It's less formal than pourtant or en revanche. French people use it all the time. Then there are the connectors of cause. The simplest is parce que, because. For example, j'étudie le français parce que je veux voyager en France. I'm studying French because I want to travel to France. It's clear and direct. You can also say comme, as, since, which means roughly the same thing, but it's sometimes used to justify something obvious. For example, comme il pleut, je vais rester à la maison. As it's raining, I'm going to stay home. And if you want to sound more assertive, you can use étant donné que, given that. As in, étant donné qu'il pleut, je préfère rester à la maison. Yes, I use parce que a lot, Laura said, and also comme, but at the beginning of the sentence. For example, comme il pleut, nous sommes restés à la maison. Maison. Since it was raining, we stayed home. That's it, right? Exactly. Very clear, I replied. We can also use pour to express a reason, but it's always placed at the beginning of the sentence. This allows us to highlight the reason. It's an excellent way to vary your expression. Let's move now to connectors that allow us to express a logical consequence. The most common is donc, therefore, so. For example, j'ai oublié mon parapluie, donc je vais être mouillé. I forgot my umbrella, so I'm going to get wet. It's very simple, very commonly used. We can also say alors, so, then, or du coup, as a result, suddenly, very colloquial, or c'est pourquoi, that's why. Du coup is very common in spoken language and sometimes overused. We often hear sentences like il n'a pas répondu, du coup je suis parti. He didn't answer, so I left. Or je suis fatigué, du coup je vais me coucher tôt. I'm tired, so I'm going to bed early. Yes, I love du coup, Laura interjected. I use it a lot, and sometimes I overdo it a little. I notice that French people use it everywhere, but it gives rhythm to the sentence. It makes it more lively. That's true, I conceded, but be careful. You should avoid overusing it. Otherwise, it becomes an automatic habit. It's better to vary. You can use donc, alors, c'est pourquoi, par conséquent. So, par conséquent, consequently, and en conséquence, as a consequence, are a bit more formal. It all depends on the level of formality and the context. Now let's talk about connectors of addition, those that allow to add information, and the most famous is et, and, of course. But you can also use en plus, in addition, what's more, or de plus, furthermore, or également, also, equally, or aussi, also, or even par ailleurs, besides, moreover, in a more formal style. For example, j'aime le cinéma, et en plus, je vais souvent au théâtre. I like cinema, and what's more, I often go to the theater. Or, il est gentil et aussi très drôle. He is kind and also very funny. Yes, I often say en plus, Laura agreed. It's very natural, and I learned that aussi cannot be at the beginning of the sentence, otherwise it changes the structure, right? Exactly, I confirmed. If you start a sentence with aussi, you have to invert the subject and verb. But that's very formal, almost literary. In spoken language, we avoid it. We prefer to say et aussi or en plus. Let's move on to connectors that allow us to give examples or illustrate an idea. You can, for example, use notamment, notably, in particular, or comme, like, as, or entre autres, among other things. For example, j'aime différents sports, notamment le ski et le snowboard. I like different sports, especially skiing and snowboarding. Ils parlent plusieurs langues, comme le français et l'allemand. They speak several languages, such as French and German. I use notamment a lot, Laura said. It makes it easier for me to explain. I often say, j'aime les plats français, notamment la quiche ou le gratin. I like French dishes, especially quiche or gratin. And I also like using entre autres. It's elegant. Yes, it's a word that helps organize a story or an argument, I agreed. For example, tout d'abord, first of all, ensuite, then, après, after, enfin, finally, pour conclure, to conclude. And finally, I will answer your questions. Yes, Laura said. That's what I learned when I had to give a presentation in French. I used tout d'abord, ensuite, and enfin to show that my,